Mr. Genuis for 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we're here looking at the government's cozy relationship with McKinsey, and thank you again to the Auditor General for your excellent work exposing significant problems, $200 million in contracts that have gone to McKinsey under this government, most of which in some way or another did not adhere to the rules. You've just mentioned the important role that PSPC, the government's contracting department, is supposed to play, could have played, challenging some of these procurements. In that light, I think it's interesting to note that the Director of Policy to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Mr. Boyan Gerasimov, he had this critical role of Director of Policy in the Minister of Public Services and Procurement's office during the critical period of the pandemic from March 2020 until December 2021. He is McKinsey alum. He served with McKinsey for more than 5 years as an engagement manager, went from working with McKinsey into this Liberal government in an important senior staff role. His LinkedIn specifically cites work he did in relation to major defense equipment procurements. So you have former McKinsey in this critical role in government procurement in the Minister of Procurement's office under then Minister Anita Anand, a former McKinsey employee, and you've highlighted that the government's contracting department that he was working for could have provided a greater challenge function, and they didn't. And we've also seen how the Defense Department in particular had a very close, extensive relationship with McKinsey. So this is quite concerning to me. It underlines the close relationships that exist between McKinsey and this Liberal government. I wonder if you could share a bit more about what role the minister's office did play or could have played, providing a challenge function around this extensive procurement relationship that emerged, and what conclusions we might be able to draw about the role that the Director of Policy in Minister Anand's office should have been playing, could have been playing, did play in relation to these procurements.
So typically I would not expect ministers to be involved at all in procurement decisions that are made by departments. And when we looked at these 97 contracts, we did not see ministerial involvement except for one where it was required by the rules. I would expect that PSPC would do a better challenge function in some of these contracts. In other areas, we saw that they did do a good challenge function. I think ultimately it boils down to making sure that everyone who's involved in the procurement process understands the rules and applies them in a way to ensure fairness, transparency, and good value for money for Canadians.
So the function of the minister's office is to set a policy framework, and the Director of Policy plays a key role in that. You're saying you wouldn't want to see them involved in kind of micro procurement decisions, but I guess for them to have a function at all, presumably it's to set that policy framework in which says how sharply they're going to exercise that challenge function or not. And there clearly were failures to challenge McKinsey procurement in cases where it should have been challenged from that department. Is that correct?
For sure. I think that PSPC should have done a better job at challenging some of the procurements that were brought to them for them to be able to issue contracts. But I would expect that challenge function also exists in every department and agency, because not all contracts go through PSPC in order to be issued.
Right. No, and I think there are problems in other places for sure, but it stuck out to me that this particular person, Boyan Gerasimov, was the Director of Policy to the Minister of Procurement in the middle of the pandemic, and that he is a McKinsey alum. Madam Auditor, just in the time I have left, I note in your report 45% of the contracts examined lacked sufficient documentation to justify the need for a contract. So in almost half of the cases of these contracts, there wasn't even evidence or sufficient evidence that there was any reason for the contract to happen in the first place, which is quite staggering in light of $200 million in contracts. Anything more you can share about that 45% figure and what it reveals?
Well, for me, it reveals that at the start, everyone should be taking a step back before they enter into a procurement process. You need to figure out if you are trying to fill a skills gap that doesn't exist in the public service, whether you need additional resources, or if you're just trying to get, plurality of thought and trying to get something outside the public service to compare to. Once you've justified that, then you make an estimate for what you think you're willing to spend for that. Those are all requirements that are in the procurement policies that exist now, and then go out and get a contract. I would expect that the default would be competitive unless there's a justification for non-competitive.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genwis for 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Auditor General, again, just kind of summarizing your report here on McKinsey contracting with this current NDP Liberal government, your frustration seems to kind of exude through the pages in a few ways. I note, for instance, on the recommendation side, you basically said, well, many of the recommendations you've made on previous reports would have relevance to this report, so you're not going to repeat them. Fixing the problems is a simple matter of adhering to the rules, and you note that it's not complicated. There are rules in place. The rules are just not being followed. And it highlights the fact that pointing out the problems is one thing, but the government has to actually be serious about implementing the solutions. And I guess it's frustrating for me to hear the discourse in response to your reports is always very, very deferential publicly from the government, saying, "Oh, we listened, we thank the Auditor General for her work, etc." But then there was a failure to implement the basic solutions, and we have a situation where you have a report coming back saying essentially, I don't need to repeat myself. Refer to previous reports for recommendations that would have addressed many of these problems. What can be done to get at this core issue of maybe governments paying lip service to recommendations you've made, but then not taking their implementation seriously?
So just a small point of clarification in this report, I wasn't referring to our previous recommendations, but those that the procurement ombuds had just recently issued, as well as the internal audit departments and the Controller General. So when it comes to following the recommendations that we give and actually implementing them, I wish I had the solution, because we often hear, yes, we agree, and then don't see action. But I have to say, following ArriveCan and throughout this audit, we saw that Treasury Board and Public Service and Procurement Canada were already making changes. So that's a positive. What I'm hoping we'll see going forward is that it isn't just a one and done, that there is a recognition that the reminder about procurement rules should happen on a regular basis. And that's why I do believe that every organization needs to make sure that they have better monitoring or better quality control system over all of this. Because while the rules may be confusing at times, they are very clear, and it's how they're applied and then well documented that should be improved.
Yeah, it is frustrating, I think, to many Canadians that after 9 years of this government, the simple matter of you've got to follow the rules and the rules aren't being followed, and where improvement is characterized as, okay, well, we're going to work harder to follow the existing rules. We're not even talking about existing rules being inadequate. We're talking about a failure to adhere to rules. In the time I have left, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Kusi. Thanks.